parasocial relationships or relationships through a screen are not quite filling the same role as genuine eye contact, for example.
You've got to risk rejection in order to find connection, which sounds a very scary thing to do.
There's something that we've not grasped with all of this.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives, a show from Priory where we talk to a panel of experts about the big issues in mental health and addictions today. I'm Colin and I'm the Chief Quality Officer here at Priory, and today we're going to be talking about loneliness and its impact on society as a whole and the challenges of staying connected in an ever disconnected world. I'm joined today by our panel of experts who are Dee Johnson, one of our senior therapists, Dr. Victoria Chamorro, who's one of our consultant psychiatrists, and Debbie Longsdale, who is our Clinical Pathways Director for our private services. Thanks everyone for joining us today. So, always one of the good things we talk about is just set the scene a little bit and some statistics around loneliness. And the Office for National Statistics data has put forward that there are 1 in 4 people refer to themselves as feeling lonely, and that's either often or always or some of the time that they feel lonely. So really significant. So a quarter of the population are feeling like that. In 2023, the World Health Organization also declared loneliness a global health threat, saying its mortality effects are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So loneliness is a really significant issue for many people. So let's start with the most basic thing, because people can feel lonely. So the question is, why do we need to feel connected? Why, as a society, do we need to have that connection? So I'm going to start. Debbie, give us your view on that. Why do we need to have connections with other people?
I think it goes back to everything goes back to caveman days, doesn't it? In terms of how we were evolved as human beings and how we operated and how we exist and how we thrive. So people appear, human beings and animals, we see it, appear to do better when we are connected to others. I think it's good for our self-esteem. I think it's good for our sense of purpose. I think it's good for our sharing of like-minded ideas and just connection and being part of something bigger, being part of a group. So it can mean lots of different things to different people. But I think what we know evolution-wise is that we survive better when we are connected to others.
Okay, interesting. So, Victoria, what do we miss out if we're not connected to others? If we've got that problem, sort of very, as Debbie referred to, that sort of caveman instinct, what is it that we miss out on?
Well, I think connection helps us psychologically. So interpersonal relationships are very important so you can develop your own emotional range and understanding. How we learn about emotions is often the first step is to reflect back what others are feeling and understand what those emotions mean. I think also we get our self-identity by our relationships with other people and a big sense of our self-esteem. And then physically, it has a whole range of functions. Being with others reduces your cortisol levels. It massively reduces your stress levels, and it increases positive hormones like oxytocin. That has huge implications for things like inflammation, sleep quality, all sorts of things. There is some studies to say that actually your immune system doesn't function as well if you have chronic loneliness. So I don't think the effect of that can be understated. I think what is becoming more apparent is parasocial relationships or relationships through a screen are not quite filling the same role as genuine eye contact, for example.
Okay. So, Dee, we sometimes hear people talk about that they feel lonely, and yet you look at what their life might be. They have a family, they have work, they have connections, they have it in some way. Why do people still talk about feeling lonely when they're surrounded by people?
You know, when seemingly they look like they've got this fulfilled life, having all those connections. So the loneliness is, a lot of people describe it as they feel invisible. They have no worth. You know, when did I disappear? And sometimes that's a sense of very low self-esteem, very low self-worth, not good enough. For some people, it's even an imposter syndrome. I don't deserve to have all these people around me. But when I hear my patients talk about loneliness in that crowded room, which I think a lot of people can identify with, it is that sense of when did I become invisible? When did people forget me? You might be a person that everybody relies on, knows, life and soul of the party, but nobody actually really sees you, and you become more and more detached, but you're still out there, and sometimes can be the most charismatic person in the room, which actually exacerbates the problem, because then people see this confident mask, this go-to person. So nobody ever realises they might be becoming more and more detached, more and more lonely, and more in trouble. They don't see it. They wouldn't expect it. They don't see it.
Okay, so it's really interesting, isn't it? That impact, you can be present, be surrounded, but still have that psychological effect. Debbie, I want to come to you because there's a question for me in here. We've all talked about loneliness, and yet we talked about being actually with people. What's the difference between loneliness and isolation? Because I think they're two things that are quite different.
It's a really big area, isn't it, to think about? And I think that we should acknowledge that it is healthy to have some time on your own and to be reflective. And I think it's okay to be bored and to stare out the window and be on your own. And I wonder if maybe we've lost that a little bit with our constant kind of stimulated environments that we live in now. But isolation and loneliness, I mean, they can be interchangeable depending on how you define them. But it's that feeling of connection, isn't it? With loneliness, I don't feel like I belong, or I don't feel like I'm heard or seen or validated, or who am I? Where am I? And I guess in our current status of living, there, I was just reflecting when you were talking that there are so many more measures that I think we have now compared to say 50 years ago of who am I, or because we're exposed to so much on social media. And I wonder if therefore there's just more things now that we think about that we should have to be interesting or to be connected. I don't know. But isolation can be where you don't feel like you fit in with your peers. So if you feel isolated at work, you might not feel that you meet other people's ideas of how they've got there or what they're doing day to day, or maybe you just don't feel like you fit in with a social group. And neurodiversity can be really interesting here in terms of people's assumptions and reality. So I think it's really good to have that reflective time around what is it that when I say I'm lonely, is it loneliness? Is it isolation? Is it unconnected? Try and define it a little bit more in terms of what people really mean when they use that word.
Let's take that on stage, because you talked about some of your experiences with people that you work with, and do you find that as a factor that comes up a lot, about people talking about loneliness having a direct impact on their mental health as well?
Oh, very much so, because that loneliness, you lose confidence, you're becoming more detached, and that lack of oxytocin, our group bonding hormone that Victoria mentioned earlier, you actually start to lose confidence on what most would take for normal social interactions. So even speaking to somebody in a shop would become very difficult. It is literally, if you don't use it, you lose it, and your confidence goes even more. So the depression can set in, the lack of self-worth, the very thought of having to interact with people, even though that's what you desperately crave, because you've not done it for a while and it becomes more difficult. Anxiety and social anxiety really kicks in here. So then you're in this stuck place where part of you knows you have to and you want to, but then now it's become so terrifying. And we saw a lot of this post-COVID as the world opened up, everybody actually desperate to get out and see each other. But when we were all given the green light, people had actually lost those skills. They'd gone so rusty. And the skills that we thought, I think Victoria, you said it, that the parasocial skills, well, we're still talking to people online on video calls, but the connection isn't quite the same. So we lost that humanity, and that becomes really isolating just in itself as a physical action. But the impact on mental health, and then the segue into that is when the self-harm comes in. So what becomes my companion? Well, that can be obsessive behaviour, can lead down to all sorts of pathways, not just addiction, but self-harm, even getting enticed into the wrong type of groups, because there is a dark web out there that takes advantage of very isolated, lonely people that feed into that sense of isolation, and we're the right people for you. And it's a really dangerous place. So that's also where we can see grooming happen as well, when people are in that low, vulnerable state. So it is extremely risky.
So let's explore something you talked about there as well with three of you, because I think there's an interesting bit about modern phenomena that maybe are impacting on people's sense of connection and isolation and loneliness and what that might feel for them. So let's pick out the one I think that we can all very immediately relate to. You mentioned it just now, Dee, which is around COVID and that time where people were isolated in their homes, were able to go out for certain things. We all experienced that together. One of the bits that really pushed towards, though, for many people, and I'm sure people watching this will be part of this community, are those that now work remotely, who are working at home. Gabby, what impact do you think that has, or what experience are you experiencing that has on people?
I think, especially for the younger generation, that it can lead to really unhealthy behaviours. It can lead to lots of demotivation for people. I think people's careers can be impacted. I think that we don't learn from each other. You know, if you think about how we evolve as people and how we learn, a lot of it is unconscious by just being in the office with people and you know, talking about something or learning about something or how to behave in a certain environment or communication skills. We learn a lot by just observing others, and you definitely do not see all of that whole picture on a screen, on a Teams or a Zoom link. So you're being exposed to a limited range of environments. And I think that whilst it can be very productive and very efficient and save travel time, and on paper it makes a lot of sense, I think certain people just don't suit that remote working. It's not good for their personality, especially if they bounce off other people quite a lot. There's lots of evidence around it leading to dementia, isn't there, for older people? So if you're an older person and thinking that you want to work remotely and that suits your family life, but actually then we're feeding all the wrong kind of behaviours and the neural pathways, and it's quite a worry that then people can slip into some really unhelpful ways of existing. So remote working is not the answer, I don't think, for everything.
Yeah. Okay. And let's explore another one. So I'm going to come to you on this, Victoria. So your views on our ability to use digital systems, social media, messaging systems, everything else around that, because there's lots of stuff that will say, you know, the world has never been so connected, and yet individuals are quite disconnected from other individuals. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the digital age has come with an alarming amount of positives. You know, we can get education when we're not in major towns. We can now work all over the place. It can be more flexible. You can support single mums, for example. All these things are really positive. But I think you've got to look at the context that this is arising in, and also how many people are affected. So if you look at kind of loneliness over a person's life, there is a natural... So back when we were cavemen, we were not lonely. We were living in very small groups where we would have always had lots of people around. Then the curve moved to be mostly elderly people being affected. And that is a travesty in absolute itself. But what is becoming even more alarming is the younger generation now are also experiencing very high levels of loneliness, and it's increasing. And so the question is really, if we're interconnected, then why is that? And it feels like rather than just complementing our modern life, it's becoming an equivalent or replacement for it. And I think that's where the danger lies. So I don't dispute all the positives. I think they are wonderful and need to be preserved. But we need to look what we're throwing out in the bathwater.
And finally on this, Dee, there's a kind of hypothesis that will say, as a nation, we have changed our sense of community over probably the last sort of 75, 80 years or so, and we've become much bigger, disengaged. Lots of the spaces and places that we had where people might have come together in smaller communities. I know we talk about mental health and addictions here, but one of the places that people would come together might be a pub or a community centre or a sort of work experience. What impact of that kind of sense of community, where's that coming from, and what impact do you see that having?
Well, it's a huge impact that actually affects everybody, even if you think you're not directly affected, because as you said, it does affect communities. People's behaviour, what we see is more low mood, often more aggression, more misunderstanding. The isolation, and we kind of get more segregated, the inclusivity and the acceptance of others. We become fearful of something that isn't us and we don't know. We're naturally suspicious, and all it is just different. So we kind of bed into our own little corners and then want to protect them. So, yeah, there's heightened levels of maybe paranoia, mistrust, just feeling very anxious and insecure. And there's a real sadness to that, which then feeds back into the depression and the loneliness. There's also a huge imposter syndrome, and I think often in the workplace and maybe with the younger generation, the high expectations of the conditions we put on the values we have. You will only be good enough if, you will only be attractive enough if, you will only be worth anything if. And if you sit there as a normal human being and think, I can't achieve all that, I'm just going to stay in my corner and hide and detach, I'm not good enough. And the sad thing is we don't help each other. The more we separate, with a sense of, I live near a beach, so there's a local community that do a beach clean. But I've even seen the numbers of that go down as people isolate. We all want to live in nice places, but the more angry, hurt and withdrawn we get, it does affect everyone, even if you're not experiencing it yourself. We are pack animals at the end of the day.
So I was really taken earlier on, there was actually a couple of you have mentioned along the way about imposter syndrome and the impact that has on people's feeling of perhaps loneliness and social isolation. So let's get an idea about what is imposter syndrome and what it means. And then let's get a view about what that might impact. So Victoria, let's start with you. Imposter syndrome, give us a sort of quick definition.
So I suppose imposter syndrome is a feeling where you don't belong in a particular group, and you feel that because you don't feel good enough. And somehow there is a deep shame that you feel that nobody else you think feels, and everyone else is doing better than you. I believe it's really a reflection of very low self-esteem that's affecting your perception of your competence. And I think that can be quite isolating, because I think that you can try and hide that kernel of you that you think is worthy of such shame and low self-esteem. And so it gets in your way of connecting with other people because you're trying to kind of keep that bit back. It's incredibly common. A lot of people have it, especially in a workplace environment. And it can be a very difficult thing to kind of talk about, especially when we're in an age where we have to kind of self-promote. I suppose the ways to get around it can be a whole myriad of it. One is to realise that it's something that you're feeling, and feelings don't necessarily equate to facts, and to kind of unpick where that would be. Now, you could do that yourself, you could do that with a family member, also even life coaches that your employers might have. That could be a reasonable solution. Or when it's very severe and limiting your life, you could get professional help.
And as a group, do we think that, we talked about those things are quite long term, aren't they? Some of those things have taken a while to develop. One of the things that I think that it's probably impacting people now as well is real cost of living challenges. Mm-hmm. That fear of actually, I just don't have the money to spend on doing some things, or actually those social activities that I'm told I need to do are actually quite expensive to do. And because we don't have those sort of low cost spaces to do something in, that becomes harder as well. Debbie, what's your view around that?
Yeah, I think it's all about acknowledging and valuing the currency that connecting with people maybe give us. So maybe we've just lost that a little bit. And I think we're all a bit efficient and looking for the quick wins and, what's going to be the impact, or what do I need to do, or what should I do from what social media tells me. I don't know if maybe people are Clarkson Farm fans, but I was watching him last week and he was talking about pubs and about how many pubs had closed down and the importance of community, and people just going there, not necessarily for an alcoholic drink even, just to go and share the problems with farming that he's focusing on, and people just don't have the places to go anymore, or they can't be bothered, or there's something that we've not grasped with all of this. Yeah.
And Victoria, I guess there's an argument to say actually we need to be thinking more about where those in-person social spaces that people can go to and being more creative, because actually there are things out there for people to do. It's just a challenge, I guess. In some areas there's more than others. What's your view about people trying to get engaged in those?
Well, I think it's a kind of self-enforcing spiral, really. I think people are spending more time in their homes. They feel anxious about returning to work and other engagements after COVID, for example. And so then that encourages them to stay home. They become rustier. Going out then has a higher level of anxiety related to it, and then that reinforces itself. I think also it affects different demographics differently. So I think particularly men are struggling. I think the average woman is more likely to ask for help, more likely to have more interpersonal relationships, and those interpersonal relationships are more likely to be around chatting, having a cup of tea, that sort of thing. While men are generally more active, they like to go do things together. And I think we're having a death of that kind of community. It's led to a lot of men specifically being isolated and not being able to feel like they can talk about it.
Okay, that's a really interesting one. I think I really want us to come back to that kind of that feel about differences within gender as well. So there's a survey from Onward that found that the proportion of under 35s who are saying that they've either got just one or no close friends has actually trebled in the last 10 years. Now that's really significant. I mean, that's a real generational shift, which, if that continues on a trend, is really quite concerning. Are we seeing that? I mean, from a sort of clinical perspective, are we seeing that as a factor? Dee, are you seeing that in your practice of people talking about, I don't have that network, I don't have those friends to talk to?
Yeah, it's become very fractious, and I think, as you said, a very rapid increase in such a short amount of time, which is very alarming. And I think maybe a lot of it is we've just lost doing the basics, haven't we, of being a human being, and there's almost a sense of a learnt helplessness here. And again, I think especially there's exposure to a lot of negative things now. This isn't about slamming any sort of social media. It has so much good and has done a lot of good and will continue. And as you said, we support the positivity of it. But on the other side, there is a constant exposure to what's bad, mad and sad all the time. So what I've seen, especially in the younger generation, is more of a suspicion, and they don't naturally trust people as much. And I think that's come with the age of technology. Years ago, a dreadful thing, but when somebody was bullied at school, that it got left at the school gates. This younger generation now, bullying is 24/7. It's horrific because it's online, it's on their devices. So you are naturally going to learn, if you like, as a primeval response, that nowhere is safe. Absolutely nowhere. You're sitting in your room at home and you're not safe because you're seeing all this abuse online about you. So you can see why people have become more isolated, especially the younger generation. Who do I trust? Who is my little clique? Because I thought that was my friend and I've just seen them saying something terrible. And that we got so much exposure all the time. It was bound to have had this knock-on effect.
Yeah. And what's the other, I mean, that's a thinking about whether that younger generation maybe. There be any reflection for you about where that older generation may be as well? Because I guess there's that impactful element that older generations will often talk about becoming lonelier as they get older, because naturally some of your connections die off.
Yeah.
And that happens.
Yeah. I've seen that with lots of people, and it's really sad to observe it, isn't it? When their circle becomes smaller, or they move to retire, or they go closer to family, but they don't see them that often. And the cognitive decline is really impactful on someone having too much time on their own. There was a study that I read quite some time ago about how much time maybe is healthy to have as free time. I think it's between 2 and 5 hours a day of kind of healthy amount of free time where you weren't committed. And I know that there are some people that have the whole day where they have no plans or and they need to do something with their time, and therefore they're watching TV, and then back to what we're filling our brains with in terms of the negative information. But our brains aren't thriving, they're not connecting, they're not growing or being fed with that human connection. So people can get older quicker if they don't have that connection, or they can become unwell, or back to your point about the immune system, and they get poorly, and then their routine becomes going to the GP or taking medication and all the side effects that come from that. So I think it can be really a real negative impact. But then it needs somebody to say, hang on a minute, can we think about what else you could do? What else could you connect with? And neighbours and communities and local events are really, really important for people. But it needs somebody to step up and organise things or coordinate things or be prepared to be that organiser. And I wonder if we have less people who are willing to take responsibility now for all of those things. So yeah, huge impact on the older generation.
Thank you. Now, I want to go back. So we talked about one demographic there, which is that age differential. I want to have a bit of a chat through now, but the bit that you brought up, Victoria, which is around gender and how that works. And so I want to throw a couple of things in here. So we talked about the Office for National Statistics survey earlier on. And so quick bit of data out of that one, which was that survey actually reported that women feel loneliness more than men. So 27% of women report feeling lonely, 23% of men feel feeling lonely. However, there's a flip side to this, where there was another survey done around masculinity and social justice, and 2/3 of young men agreed with the statement, "No one really knows me well." Gosh. So there's a question for me in there about terminology, understanding, self-perception, and how do women perceive loneliness and isolation versus how men see it, and everything that surrounds that. So I think it's a huge one to unpick, but I just wanted to kind of get just those overarching views on it. So Victoria, you started talking about gender earlier on. What does that all mean to you?
Yeah, it might be that women feel lonelier when they have less time on their own. So basically tolerate loneliness less well. That's possible. And of course, when we're talking about averages here, we're really kind of talking about bell curve. So obviously there's overlaps. But in my clinic and my patients' experience, I typically find it's the men that are struggling with more loneliness. I think there is an ability for women to seek help. And in fact, answering that question on that survey to say that I'm lonely might be a reflection of more self-identification of what the problem is. While typically men, I have lots of patients who will work all of Friday, for example, not see anybody Saturday, Sunday, and then work on Monday. And then you can see that if that's also working from home, the amount of isolation is quite entrenched. And that's with young men. I don't see that picture so much in a female group, or they feel more comfortable talking about it. And I think when we're talking about men's mental health, access and feeling like you can talk about it is one of the major hurdles.
Which I'm going to bring Dee in on that, because what I really want to, I think it'd be really helpful for people to kind of get that sense of is, when does it start becoming something that needs help and support? Because actually, I don't think there's any of us can't turn around and say, at some point I felt a bit lonely. That actually I've been doing something, there's no one around me, I've had a couple of days, and you get that sense of, and where do I find that connection, everything else that surrounds it. And so there's definitely some stuff we'll talk about later on, those sort of practical tips that people can do. But I want to just get that sense, perhaps for yourself, Dee, about what are those things to look out for that said, actually, do you know what, this loneliness that I'm feeling is really starting to impact on my well-being, on my mental health, on my physical health. What sort of things would people be looking out for?
The red flags, you're often very good at hiding them at first and being able to identify them. You said, what do other people look out for as well as yourself? And it can be quite hard to be objective about yourself. We're only ever subjective. But I think the little flags that you look out for are actually losing that motivation to contact someone. Because when people say, oh, I'm lonely, and that is that sense of emptiness inside, and then you think, well, I'll just call that person, but there's nothing left in you to do it. I can't even text them. What's the point? Neglecting yourself. Well, there's no point showering today. I'm not going to go out and see anybody. Now I'm not caring what you're eating. Are you not taking a medication if you're on any? Saying no to things because as you've lost the confidence in your social skills, even though your heart's aching, somebody does actually give you an invitation, suddenly it's too overwhelming, so you learn to say no, and over time you become forgotten because you become the person everybody knows that never turns up or never goes to anybody. And it's a real fear of rejection. So the safety behaviour is, well, I'm not going to put myself out there and risk anything to get that rejection. And the red flags, if you can sit down and kind of have that conversation with yourself and really think about it, and if there is somebody else, what have they observed with you? Even when you come out, you don't talk much, or you do say no to things and say yes but then don't turn up. I've noticed that maybe you're not taking care of yourself so much. The small everyday things, aren't they? Because it's such an insidious thing. Just little things to look out for. It doesn't have to be something major and catastrophic. And we're trying to get to the point, look out for these things before it does become so problematic that maybe somebody does go into suicide ideation or goes into full-blown addiction or self-harm. Because then there's still hope from that, but you're in real trouble at that point.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I kind of want to move that on slightly, because we've talked about the things to look out for. There's definitely things we're going to come back to, talk about those kind of self-care, good tips and good ideas. But I just want to get people to get that sense of, if it's gone too far, it's become really, really challenging. Treatment. What sort of treatment is right for someone who's experiencing loneliness? And I guess the question is there specific treatments for loneliness, or is it about you managing and treating the symptoms that might become because of the challenge? So, Victoria, let's start with yourself on that. Your views about treatment for loneliness.
Yeah, it's a very difficult area, actually. So loneliness has a massive overlap with mental illness. So if you're lonely, you're more likely to be depressed, and if you're depressed, you're more likely to feel lonely. I think depression particularly is a very introspective illness that encourages withdrawal from others, and that could be treated in normal ways with medication and psychology. Loneliness itself is more of a cultural phenomenon that needs to be addressed on a population level, I think, rather than necessarily thinking of it, well, I suppose, making it clinical. You know, that this is something that we can all get involved in, doesn't need professionals necessarily to be involved in. It's something that we all can be proactive about. I suppose it would be things like befriending services. And I put both things there. So if you're somebody who's lonely, you could sign up for a befriending service. But if you're somebody that's not, you could also sign up for a befriending service to give that particularly to the older people. It is about a different thought process around the things that keep us mentally resilient. And I think that interconnection, connectiveness has not been prioritised in the same way other things have. Of course, if you just eat junk food every day, you're going to feel a bit rubbish. We don't have the same kind of cultural conversations about loneliness. So I would like to see a kind of shift in conversation about it more than anything else. I see quite a lot of my patients who come to me requesting essentially medication or some sort of fix for the situation that they're in. And it's not a medical issue as much as getting somebody out there. Now, there are some treatments. They can get involved with things like occupational health. So somebody's become very entrenched. Occupational therapy can help them get up and moving. People can also feel very desensitized or oversensitive to becoming in social interactions. So that can be put in a kind of stepwise plan to get you back out there and doing things. But I don't think the answers are particularly clear, and I think that in itself also makes things more difficult.
Okay. So let's think about some of those practical things, because I actually, completely hear what you're saying, that this is we don't want to over medicalize. This is something that has a cultural element to it. There are definite factors we talked about earlier on. There's sort of changes in modern life, living styles, etc., that impact that's had. So I want to just have a think through about maybe one from each of you about a tip. And actually, you can do it one of two ways. Either you can give a tip for someone who's feeling lonely, or maybe just a tip for people who think that someone may be lonely and how to engage them, and maybe to do something that will help them as well. Because I think that's often a way. People will often talk about that person feels lonely to me. But actually sometimes that's a hard thing to do something with. So it's one or the other. So let's start with you, Dee.
One's hard. I often say to my clients when we're working with loneliness, you've got to risk rejection in order to find connection. Which sounds a very scary thing to do, but it is starting to reach out to people, tell somebody, even if it's just one person, find a therapist if you're able to. There are support groups out there, but that is a big thing, risk rejection to find connection, because not everybody's going to like us, not everybody's going to want our company, but that's okay. That's normal. We don't like everybody and we don't have to. And the more you put yourself out there and just dip your toe in the water, but I think the other part of it, you said one, but from the other flip side, do not ever say to somebody, you know where I am if you need me, because they will never call. You take action, you be proactive, which will make you feel better as well. So, but that helps that person get out of that situation of risking rejection. Oh, actually, somebody's making an effort. They've turned up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Victoria.
I suppose mine is a reflection, really. When you talk about the statistics that you have, they are alarming, but they also show that you're not alone in your loneliness. And I think that is a thing that people take with them. No one else is feeling as I'm feeling. Everyone else has got millions of friends and are having a wonderful time. And actually, that's not the case. It says that we're all struggling with this. So I suppose reach out for yourself, reach out for others, but certainly this is happening to everybody, or huge amounts of people.
I think my thoughts would be, I would say to somebody, if you weren't lonely, what's the opposite of that for you? So how would you want to feel if you weren't feeling lonely? And then try and understand what that would mean they would need to do differently. And maybe that would mean going to the office one day a week more. It might mean I'm going to go to 3 events this week. It might mean whatever that means for that person, or finding somebody new. And then I would suggest that we have it's quite a depression therapy treatment, but almost have a schedule where then you plan it and you say, for the next month, I know that I would like to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to plan the days I'm going to do it on. I'm going to spread it out across the week, and then I'm going to review on a scale of 0 to 10. Sorry, I'm going very therapy mode now. How I felt 4 weeks. So today I feel like a 7 in terms of very lonely. And then in 4 weeks' time, I now feel like a 3. Okay, and what impact of those events or those things or those ideas that you had, what impact has that had? And then you can start to learn what you need to manage your own loneliness, because it will be very individual, I guess, for different people.
As we know, one of the things we like to do on Perspectives is we go out to our viewers and we ask questions. We want to get their ideas so they can come to the panel. And we've got absolute crackers today. I think these are really good, and I think they really feed into the conversation that we've had so far. So I'm going to ask. I've got one from Becky and one from Stuarts. I'm going to do Becky's first. So Becky says, "I'm autistic and I struggle with sensory issues in social settings. How can I build connection without overwhelming myself?" Let's start with D.
Good question, Becky. And a question that a lot of people will struggle with, because that's the thing, isn't it? When you have that sensorial overload, and people just say, "Well, go out and do this." It's just not that easy. If you feel comfortable enough to say to somebody, "Actually, I am neurodiverse," you don't even have to say what it is. I think that helps a lot. There's so much more understanding of it now, and acceptance, and more knowledge. If you feel you can do that, that's a good start. Stay with 1 or 2 people that you feel safe with, and take control, take ownership. Don't do what you think everybody else is doing. Actually, what do I like to do? What would I like to try? What would suit me? You'll know what your triggers are. You'll know what your sensorial issues are. So go to places that you know you're going to feel comfortable and try it. And as Debbie said, you use, kind of a rating chart. Take pressure off yourself, but don't use any negative language about yourself. "Well, I failed, it was useless." If you did 2 minutes, fantastic, you did 2 minutes. If the next time you did 5, brilliant. But just if you can be honest about it and why it's difficult for you. Normally the worst judge is ourselves, that fear and embarrassment. So small steps, very small steps. But again, it's a bit like the whole loneliness thing. There's a lot more people that struggle with that and have that question than maybe Becky realises. She's not on her own.
Thanks, T. Victoria, any thoughts for Becky?
Yeah, I suppose it's a case of picking your event. Again, neurodiverse is so much of a spectrum and so much individualised. It's difficult to give kind of tailored advice when we don't know much about Becky. But for example, say noise is something you really struggle with. Don't go to a noisy pub. Maybe start with some events that are in the park, or coffee mornings or something like that. If you find groups of people overwhelming, try and go with a friend. Or if you don't have anybody in your particular area, you could make contact with somebody also going to the event, saying, "Can we meet half an hour beforehand and have a coffee?" People are generally very open to that sort of thing. So I suppose it's kind of tailoring the experience to your particular difficulties.
Thank you. And Debbie, anything for Becky?
Yeah, I think for Becky, I would say try and take a strengths-based approach. So accepting that that is her reality, that she has that, and that is true for her. There will be a list of things that she can do, or that she does enjoy, or that it feels appropriate for her. So rather than focusing on what she can't do or what feels unhelpful, I would suggest that she focuses on the things that she does enjoy and that she does feel manageable and does wants to go and do rather than doesn't want to go and do, and then engineer, okay, who can I go to that with, or how do I get there, or how do I make that happen, and just try and flip it round and focus on what she'd like to do.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Right. We're going to come back up the line for this next one. So we're going to start with you, Debbie. So this is from Stuart. And I really like this question. I think it's a tricky one. I'm going to be honest with you. So Stuart asks, I worry about someone I know. Sometimes I wonder if they are lonely or just introverted and happier on their own. How can I tell the difference?
Yeah, Stuart, that's a great question. And I think it's having a gentle conversation, isn't it? Because the worst thing we can do is offer our lens on how we think somebody else should exist, because I do this, therefore you should do that and you should enjoy it. The fact that he is worrying about his friend is great, that actually he's reaching out and thinking about somebody else. So I think it's trying to put yourself in their shoes and noticing, do they seem to be enjoying things? Do they just like to go home early, or do they not even turn up? Do they cancel quite a lot? That would be probably something to keep an eye on. And then it's trying to find a way of having an open communication. And maybe it's bringing it in as, you know what, I read an article last week about this, and what do you think about this? And maybe making it quite a gentle topic if it's something he wants to talk to a friend about directly. Don't make it about him, because I think that'll probably be too much of a spotlight and maybe too much pressure. But it could be a gentle way of discussing a topic and what do we think about this, and then seeing where the conversation goes. But also be careful that Stuart doesn't become a rescuer and it's his problem to fix somebody else, because that maybe isn't a healthy dynamic either in the relationship. But lovely that he's thinking about somebody else, and I really hope he finds a way of opening it up as a conversation.
Brilliant. Victoria?
So yeah, I would go back towards what Stuart's trying to ask about is the subjective experience rather than how many people he has in his life or how often he's seeing his friends. So it's more, how do you feel about it rather than what's actually happening. And there are a couple of ways you can go into that. You could ask about general hobbies. You could just ask a very open question like, are you okay? How are you? And I suppose you're looking for difference in patterns. So as you were saying, if someone's been very gregarious and very outgoing and suddenly becomes quite reclusive, that's a big sign. If it's somebody who goes, no, actually I've got my hobbies at home and I'm very happy, then that's a completely different picture. So I suppose you could ask them what they like doing, whether they'd like to come to things or that's not their vibe, and whether how they're generally feeling in their lives.
Okay. Finally, Dee.
It's about just having a really brave and honest conversation, and with all that care. I mean, what a lovely question that somebody's observed a friend and actually wants to know the difference. So I think sometimes I would just say it in a very gentle way. It might be my stuff, but my head is saying, I'm a bit worried about you, I've noticed. And maybe he has noticed some of the red flags, that it's been a bit neglectful, or, you know, just not looking after himself so much. We talk about, and especially you mentioned earlier, men's mental health, and I think it's a really important thing for us sometimes not to be, you know, you don't want to go in like a bull in a china shop, but actually have a direct conversation. I've noticed, am I reading this wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong or right, and tell me what you would like to do. What would you like from me? Not, as you said, run in and be the rescuer and the fixer, because they might not need fixing, they might be fine. But what would you like from me? And say, and maybe share a bit of your experience when you felt lonely, and then those two can start a conversation. But the fact that you just care enough to say to somebody, I could be calling this wrong, but this is what I've observed. That's the conversation opener. We talk about we need to talk more. It's as simple as that.
Brilliant. Thank you all, and I hope for Stuart and Becky, they were both really helpful answers. Thank you. So thank you so much to the panel. Now, if you've been watching us today and you've enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe to our channel for even more content. And I'm really hoping you'll be pleased to hear that we're also now going to be available in audio form. So you'll be able to find us on Spotify, on Amazon Music, and on Apple Podcasts. So thanks again for watching us today.